Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into what's honestly one of the most high-stakes tightrope walks in all of business operations: strategic capacity planning. We're going to look closely at how organizations attempt to achieve that perfect match between their long-term supply capabilities and their predicted levels of long-term demand. It's a really delicate balance, and getting it wrong can cost a company millions or even cost them their entire reputation.
Okay, let's look at our roadmap for today. We'll be covering the balancing act, 3 key questions, design versus effective capacity, strategies and capacity cushions, managing the bottlenecks, and finally, cost-volume analysis. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The Balancing Act.
So, what exactly is capacity? At its core, it's just the upper limit, the absolute ceiling on the load that an operating unit can handle. To put that into perspective, picture a massive bottling plant. Its capacity might be strictly defined by the equipment's physical ability to fill exactly 10,000 bottles an hour. Or think about a university. The capacity of a lecture hall isn't some abstract concept, it's literally the 250 physical seats available in that room. Equipment, physical space, and even the specific skills of employees, they all dictate this absolute ceiling. Now, the whole goal of strategic capacity planning is to match that physical ceiling with long-term demand. And man, this is where that tightrope walk really comes into play. If a business builds way too much and leans into overcapacity, operating costs absolutely skyrocket. They just bleed money keeping empty factories running or paying idle staff. But if they lean the other way, into undercapacity, well, they strain the resources to the breaking point, and inevitably, they alienate and lose customers because they simply can't deliver.
Section 2. 3 key planning questions.
To keep our balance on this tightrope, every strategic capacity decision, which, by the way, usually involves massive long-term financial commitments, hinges on 3 deceptively simple questions. What kind of capacity is needed? How much is needed to match demand? And when is it needed? These 3 questions dictate the initial costs and permanently affect how competitive an organization will be. And getting the answers right, well, that requires incredibly accurate forecasting over a really long time horizon.
Section 3. Design versus effective capacity.
We obviously have to measure capacity in units that make sense, but we also have to define it accurately. Because trust me, there is a massive difference between the theoretical and the practical here. Design capacity is the maximum output rate a facility is perfectly designed for on paper. But effective capacity, that's reality. It's the design capacity minus all those necessary unavoidable allowances. Things like employees taking personal time or machines needing scheduled maintenance. The truth is, a system almost never hits its perfect theoretical maximum.
So, what exactly chips away at that maximum potential? Well, it's a crazy variety of real-world obstacles. And it's not just broken machines. You've got human factors, like absenteeism and learning curves. You've got operational factors, like scheduling hiccups and inventory management. You even have external factors, like safety regulations and pollution control standards. All of these act as determinants that drag our pristine design capacity right down to our effective capacity.
Let's bring this to life with a tangible example. Imagine a truck manufacturing plant. Let's say the absolute design capacity is 50 trucks a day. But once you factor in maintenance and brakes, the effective capacity drops to 40 trucks. Now, let's say on a given day, the actual output is only 36 trucks. By comparing that actual output of 36 to our effective capacity of 40, we get an efficiency rating of 90%. But if we compare that actual output to our perfect design capacity of 50, well, that gives us a utilization rate of just 72%. This right here is exactly how managers keep score, and unfortunately, that score is rarely 100%.
Section 4. Strategies and capacity cushions.
When it comes to actually expanding, organizations generally pick one of 3 paths based on how they read their competitors and market growth. First, there's a leading strategy. This means building capacity in anticipation of future demand, basically getting ahead of the curve. Then, there's a following strategy. This is a safer, wait-and-see approach where you hold off on building until demand definitively exceeds your current capacity. Finally, we have tracking. This is similar to following, but you add capacity in relatively small, continuous increments to closely pace that increasing demand.
But, as we all know, demand is rarely perfectly predictable, right? That's exactly why organizations use a capacity cushion. Think of this as your critical shock absorber or safety net. It's the extra capacity held in reserve just to offset demand uncertainty. And it's super easy to calculate, just 100% minus your utilization rate. If you're in a highly volatile market where demand is all over the place, you're definitely going to need a much larger capacity cushion.
But if you're selling highly standardized products in a super predictable market, you can usually get away with a pretty small one.
Section 5. Managing the bottlenecks.
Now let's talk about the biggest internal threat to our balancing act: constraints and clogged pipes. Imagine a flow of operations. You have operations 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they're all perfectly capable of producing 10 units per hour. But they all funnel into a single bottleneck operation. Because that central bottleneck is arbitrarily capped at 30 units per hour, the entire system is capped at 30. A bottleneck is simply an operation in a sequence where the capacity is lower than the others, and it literally dictates the ceiling for your whole process.
So how do we fix this? Resolving these constraints requires a highly disciplined, cyclical process. First, you have to actually identify the most pressing constraint. Second, change the operation to get the absolute maximum benefit out of that specific constraint. Third, and honestly, this is absolutely crucial, make sure all the other portions of the process are completely supportive of that constraint. Don't overload it. Fourth, evaluate long-term ways to overcome it, like maybe investing in new machinery. And fifth, repeat the whole process. Because the funny thing is, the very moment you clear one bottleneck, another one will inevitably pop up somewhere else as you elevate your capacity.
Section 6. Cost-volume analysis.
All right, moving on to our final tool. Cost-volume analysis is basically the mathematical compass we use to evaluate if our tightrope walk is actually going to be profitable. It focuses heavily on the relationship between costs, revenue, and the volume of output. The fundamental formula breaks it down quite simply. Your total cost equals your fixed costs, which remain totally constant no matter how much you produce, like your rent or base salaries, plus your variable costs, which vary directly with your output volume, like the cost of raw materials.
By truly understanding those costs, we can identify the absolute holy grail of capacity planning, the break-even point. What is that? Well, the break-even point is the precise volume of output at which your total cost and your total revenue are exactly equal. It is that magical, exact moment the business finally stops bleeding money from its fixed costs and actually begins generating a profit on every single subsequent unit sold. Let's visualize how this plays out. The crucial moment to look for is the exact intersection where the total revenue line crosses the total cost line. Everything to the left of that intersection point basically represents loss. But the second you cross that break-even point volume on the horizontal axis, the revenue line pulls ahead of the cost line, and boom, you enter the profit zone. When managers are trying to decide whether to buy 1, 2, or 3 machines, they use these charts to clearly see which option gives them the most achievable and profitable break-even point. I do have to caution you, though. This objective, mathematical compass, it only works if some very specific, stable conditions are met. Cost-volume analysis assumes that there's only one product involved. It assumes that absolutely everything produced is going to sell. It assumes your fixed costs won't unexpectedly jump and that your revenue per unit stays perfectly constant regardless of volume. But let's be real. In the messy real world, things change incredibly fast. So you really have to scrutinize these assumptions.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a core takeaway from our source material. Capacity planning determines the conditions under which operations will have to function. The strategic decisions a company makes today about leading or following, about design versus effective capacity, these permanently shape its agility. By intelligently using capacity cushions and rigorously managing bottlenecks, an organization massively reduces its dependence on perfect forecast accuracy.
It's an incredibly challenging endeavor, for sure, but mastering it is literally the difference between thriving and merely surviving. So, I'll leave you with this to ponder regarding your own industry. As global demand inevitably shifts tomorrow, will your operations be walking a stable, well-planned path or a very frayed tightrope? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.